Hello, my fellow flower nerds. It has been too long. It has been over a year actually since my last recorded video. So I am going to be talking about similar things to what I spoke about a year ago. I wanted to get back on to YouTube and try and be consistent in posting again because, well, more like initially, because I wasn't really consistent the first time around. I had a really big loss affect me, and it affected me in ways that I really can't describe, except to say that it kind of overtook my life. It was really a complicated grief. It still is very complicated, but since the celebration of life, I feel like I've kind of turned a page finally. It still hurts and it's still a process, but I don't feel so debilitated anymore as I did for like 6 months, almost 6 months. So all that is to say that I am feeling motivated again. I am feeling inspired again, and I'm happily focused on my passion again. So first things first, I wanted to kind of give you some background about, since this video is about dahlias, about why dahlias are so huge to me. So when I was younger, dahlias were just the one flower that took my breath away, but also the one that I like always wanted in a bouquet. And then one year my sister actually mentioned that dahlias reminded her of me, which I thought was the sweetest thing in the world, because the way she explained it is that it was after I left a really serious relationship, and she said that the way that I bloomed since leaving that relationship was like a dahlia. How like all these layers just kept coming out, and I just thought it was really beautiful. So I have another attachment on that level to dahlias, but since becoming a flower farmer and learning and absorbing all I can, I am just in awe of them. The complexity of their genetics honestly takes my breath away. The potential, the way that they make people smile, it's just, yeah, incomparable in my opinion. So today's video is going to be all about dahlia. First things first, I wanted to talk about when and how to dig tubers. So let's first talk about the when. When is going to be, and this is similar to a lot of things I'm going to talk about this video, is your capacity and where you live. So where I live is in Mount Vernon, Washington, which is zone 8B. And so our last frost date is around the end of October, beginning of November. In 2024, it was supposed to be October 31st. It didn't end up being until a couple weeks later. So the reason why I bring up the last frost date is because with dahlias, it's recommended to wait until that last frost date happens. And then at that point you can go out, cut the plant down to about 6 inches above the ground, and then you can start digging. If you want to start digging though, you can also leave them in the ground depending on where you live, and you can divide them and dig them in the spring. Where I live is really wet, and so you run the risk of tuber rot, and because the ground can be so wet. So I try to avoid that. So my preference is to dig after the first frost, and this year it was a little delayed on when I typically would like to dig because of everything I had going on with that loss. Once I had them all dug though, I just kind of kept them in bulb crates and let them sit until I was ready to divide them. How to dig them is going to be, there's a recommended way of doing it. If you don't have a pitchfork, totally fine. You just might want to go a little wider than what's recommended. So with your pitchfork, what you want to do is you go up to the plant, make sure it's that cut above the ground about 6 inches, make sure you label it. And then I usually use Flagger's tape for labeling. And then you want to go from the stalk of the dahlia about 1.5 feet out, and then put your pitchfork in the ground and push up. Once you're in the ground, push up. And you want to do that on 4 sides of the plant. By that point, it should definitely be out of the ground. It should be coming up quite a bit. It was a little harder for me this year because I had planted my dahlias in a section that isn't the most healed, so the soil isn't very loose, but it worked. Okay, how and when to divide tubers. So let's see, when is again your capacity. As long as you're storing them and they're not going to be exposed to freezing temperatures, because once they're frozen, they're done for, and that you might as well just toss them at that point. And so you got to make sure that you're figuring that out for yourself and what works best for you. How to divide them though, you want to make sure that you look at the tuber, like each individual tuber on the plant. There has to be a body, a neck, and a head. And the head is what is usually attached to the plant. So on the body, at the very end, it's like it comes to a point and there's a root that comes off of it. You want to make sure you cut the root and see if there's any rot. If there is rot that you can see, which will be like brown or discolored, it should be like a kind of a white color. You want to keep cutting down a little bit until you reach a spot where there's no rot, and then you can let that like heal over, and it'll heal over. And then from that point, then you have your piece of your body, your neck, and your head. Now, where to cut on the head at the plant. I will insert a couple of pictures right here for you to see what it looks like and then where you would place your scissors to cut. I will also link down below the scissors that I like to use, my preferred scissors. When dividing, you want to make sure that you have a glass of bleach water so you can sanitize your snips in between each plant, each dahlia plant. This is to prevent any passing of any bacteria or viruses or anything like that. And then how to store tubers. Storing tubers is a topic of a lot of disagreement within the flower farming community. There are all types of ways to do it. People have success with so many ways. It's really your own preference and like finding what works for you, for your capacity through winter, for your home or wherever you're planning on storing them. The primary thing is you want to make sure that they don't freeze and that they don't rot and that they don't dry out. Those are three major worries for overwintering them. So a lot of people have coolers that they control the humidity and the temperature within, and they can monitor it at all times. I run a very small flower farm and I'm just getting my feet under me, so I don't have the funds to have a cooler quite yet. But I have found that what works for me is I store them in my sunroom in my house. This is a spot that is typically our cat room because our outdoor cat, it's where she has her cat tree, her food, her water, all of that. If she does want to come inside and stay the night indoors. It stays a really nice temperature because it's still a part of the house. And with the door slightly open, it keeps it really cool in there, but not too cool. It never freezes in there. So that's where I store them. This year I have stored them in plastic tubs that are about like this big and then layers of vermiculite. So there's a layer of vermiculite, tubers, make sure they're not touching, another layer of vermiculite to cover them, more tubers, same thing, not touching, and then more vermiculite. You can keep doing it depending on how big the tubers are. Sometimes you only have a couple layers because the tubers are really big. Other times you have like 3 layers because they're pretty small. And that's the way that I have found that works the best. I have tried in paper bags with vermiculite. They just tend to get a little more dried out because they aren't sealed. It doesn't hold any moisture in. It actually sucks moisture away. So next I want to talk about when to wake up tubers. So if you're wanting to wake up tubers to increase your reproduction of tubers for the year, you need to make sure that you take a couple of things into account. First and foremost, you want to make sure you have the supplies. So you're going to need soil to put the tubers in. You're going to need pots for the cuttings to go into. And if you do it in a smaller situation, like I use these, you want to make sure that you pot them up once they feel firm. because once they feel firm, that means that the roots are starting to form, and you don't want them to get root bound within that little tiny pot. You want to pop them up. What I use for potting a tuber to wake up and then also potting up my cuttings are these, or something similar sized. I also have some square ones that are about that size. Depending on how early you start, you may need to pot them up even bigger pots before you can plant them out. Another common mistake with taking cuttings or waking up tubers for cuttings is too much moisture, which then causes that tuber to rot. So you want to make sure you can keep that moisture level under control. Sprinkling vermiculite on top helps, especially with any algae or moss growth. Now, how to take cuttings. Once you have your tuber in your little pot with soil and you have a sprout that comes up from one of the eyes, you want to make sure there's at least 2 sets of true leaves. So there's always going to be a little set of baby leaves. They're very small and very different from the plant true leaves. And then they'll have true leaves that come up after the baby leaves. So you want 2 sets of true leaves before you take that cutting. When you take the cutting, you can just wiggle it off of the tuber, or you can take a clean razor, sterile razor, and cut it off. And from that same point, or even next to it, more sprouts will come. And you want to make sure you only take 10 from each tuber. This is imperative because in taking any more, it removes the energy that is within the tuber to produce more tubers or to produce another plant when you plant that tuber into the ground. If you just want to use that tuber to get more cuttings, go ahead. Keep cutting as much as you can. But if you want to take that tuber and put it in the ground to increase your tuber yield again, you don't want to exhaust it. The last thing I wanted to talk about real quick is when to plant out dahlias. So this can be something that a lot of people aren't sure about. I'm just going to keep it real simple. Mother's Day weekend. That is the preferred time for your plant to mature over 180 days. So that is the best time. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you have questions, leave them down in the comments or message me on Instagram. I will also include links down below for my website where my blog is, my Instagram, my TikTok, and all those things.